Welcome to Hood Champion Boxing and Sports. In boxing, you find a way to win or you find a way to lose. But the question is this, right? I know we've been talking a lot about Tony Harrison, about Tim Tszyu. And you know what? I'm not done talking about it. I am not at all here to kind of repeat a lot of the things that we've discussed on the channel, on lives. But it's something that kind of dawned on me while watching Harrison and Tszyu fight. And I was actually putting a thumbnail together to talk about, pads versus clean. But then I got a phone call. One of my teammates, Mills, you'll probably see him in the chat, MD Mills, man. But we started talking about Tszyu and Harrison and just trying to figure out what went wrong, right? Because we get it. Tim Tszyu won the fight, all right? So I want to make sure I say that. For anyone out here who's new to the channel, make sure you like, subscribe, consider donating. But also don't assume that I'm biased to Tony Harrison, because I'm not. We like to peel the layers back here to get a better understanding of what goes right with fighters and what goes wrong. And I'm going to tell you, Mills and I just really couldn't figure out why Tony Harrison performed the way he did. But as we started having that discussion, we quickly kind of locked in on a couple things that could have possibly gone wrong. And those are the things that I want to talk about here in this video. Now, let's jump right into it. All right, look. What a lot of us expected, okay? I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of us expected for Tony Harrison, maybe around the 7th, 8th round, if he wasn't able to stay focused, we said that's where he can get in trouble and could possibly get knocked out. But we felt that he had a good 7 to 8 rounds in him, and then maybe lose focus and things go downhill. But none of us could have anticipated Tony Harrison coming out, having somewhat of a decent round, and then the first round and everything just started to unravel. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, when I watched that fight and what Mills and I were talking about, the thing is this, Harrison's been fighting since he's been 5 years old. And although we can't make sense of what took place, the question is what we saw performance-wise from Tony Harrison, right? Is that what we should see from all 32-year-old boxers? Like, is that what a clean boxer looks like at the age of 32? You see, that's the question. Now, the reason why we started having this discussion is because, okay, me, I'm always out here with a conspiracy theory, talking about the secret society, who's doing PEDs. I'm always talking about Victor Conte, Heredia, Alex Ariza, Usman Sajjad. But I have no reason to believe Tim Tszyu was on PEDs, right? But when you watch, and I'm going to tell you right now, I truly don't believe he's on PEDs, right? And I'm going to tell you why. Because he didn't look spectacular. I don't think Tim Tszyu winning that fight was because of anything he did great. And I'm just being honest. He is a simple fighter. There's nothing special about him. And Harrison, in my opinion, I got to be careful what I say because I still don't quite understand what's wrong. Harrison just looked like he was there to just kind of get a paycheck, right? But let's keep it around that conversation of just being clean. Now, the shelf life for a lot of boxers, especially when you go back and you start thinking about a lot of the ageless wonders who have been involved in boxing. Most boxers, when you really go back years ago, they weren't fighting, especially beyond the age of 35. But that was like unthinkable for a fighter to go beyond the age of 35. So to see that a guy like Harrison, it's like his expiration date arrived at age 32. And you figure he's in there with a young lion like Tim Tszyu in his 20s. Then this could be the younger, more active fighter, more energy, a bit more powerful, super small ring, and that was the difference. But my thing is this, right? Harrison's an outstanding boxer, questionable chin, questionable power. But how can a guy like, let's look, like even Terrence Crawford seemed to be getting better with every fight. The Earl Spencers seem to be getting better with every fight and getting older. Yugas, Luis Ortiz, Erislandy Lara, Deontay Wilder. And anyone else out there who's 35 and older. How is it possible for them to keep getting better? That's my question, and I really would like for someone to help me to understand that. Now, I will say this, right? When you look at boxing from years ago, I understand there were guys like Larry Holmes fighting into his 40s. I understand there were guys like George Foreman. We know what he did to Michael Moore coming out there at the MGM Grand. He was 45 years old. Got him out there by the 10th round. You know what I'm saying? When you take a look at even beyond that, you had the Archie Moores, 1958. The man was like, no one knew what his real age was, whether he was 42 or 45, but he was well beyond 40. But these are like exceptions to the rule. Then you look at, of course, the alien. We all know who I'm talking about here. Bernard Hopkins and what he was able to do at age 46 against John Pascal, picking up the WBC light heavyweight title. You know what I'm saying? But those are like exceptions to the rules. But if you look at what happened recently, like a guy like Manny Pacquiao, there's always been rumors surrounding him and possibly taking some kind of banned substance or something to increase his performance in the ring. And you look at what he did against a guy like Keith Thurman. Now, don't get me wrong. The latter half of the fight, Keith Thurman really started to put a good beating on Pacquiao, but it was still very competitive. And you tell me how Pacquiao at 40 was able to still get in the ring and perform with that kind of intensity and take that kind of beating and then also dish it back out to a young, hungry lion like Keith Thurman. You talk about an unbeaten, big, strong welterweight and super athletic. Now, we know Thurman had nagging injuries and everything else. Against Josecito Lopez, he had some ring rust. He had to get those inactivity barnacles off of him. But he was still one of the best at 147. And I think when you got a guy who knows he's up against someone like that. Now, I don't have any proof of anything, but it makes me wonder how at over 40 are they able to do that? And then you look at Tony Harrison at 32. He looked like he was in his 60s. You know what I'm saying? It just really makes me wonder. I mean, you go on and you think about some of the other fights. Even one of our favorite people right now, Connor Hinn, and you look at when Thulani Malanga fought his father Nigel Benn. Malanga was like 40 years old, and it is what it is. But he came out there, man, from 1990 to 1993. You know what I'm saying? It had a 45 record in a 9-fight stretch. But this is the thing. Once we look at all of that, and we definitely can't forget Bernard Hopkins and Kelly Pavlik, what Bernard Hopkins did at age 43 to get in there and handle business, right? But I'm going to say this. Hopkins gave Pavlik a frustrating boxing lesson, right? But I'm going to say this. These guys are the exceptions. But what seems to be the norm now? And I understand sports science is different, nutrition is different. I understand that strength and conditioning is different. The supplementation strategy and approaches are different. I mean, you look at bodybuilders from the 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way up to the 2000s, and look at them now. I mean, the physiques are totally different, and that has a lot to do with just science. But at the same time, there's got to be more to it than just sports medicine, nutrition for a guy. Because let me tell you something, Father Time is undefeated. You know what I'm saying? And these guys who are in these professions, combat sports, combatants, anything that requires these guys to have to fight and defend themselves, if they start feeling like they're getting a little bit slower or like they're getting touched a little bit more and they want to remain competitive, look, they got to go that, what's his name, Lance Armstrong, the cyclist? That's what happens. They get involved with the wrong stuff to get an edge. And I think although a lot of people are so critical on Tony Harrison, I think we need to stop and really take a look at it. And if anything, maybe he needs to be commended for being a clean fighter that showed us all what a clean fighter is supposed to look like at age 32, especially if you've been boxing since you've been 5 years old. Now, the old versus young argument, right? Hey, maybe, like we said earlier, maybe it is the fact that Costa Azul's in his 20s and Harrison's 32. And it was just a matter of youth versus, a more mature fighter. And, youth just happened to win. But that's not always the case. When you think about it, especially when you look at like how Juan Manuel Marquez. Now, I truly believe Juan Manuel Marquez was on that juice. This man got better as he got older in the Pacquiao fights. He could never knock Pacquiao down. Then at age 39, he comes in there looking like a bodybuilder. And then with one big sonic boom right hand, at the age of 39, knocks Pacquiao out cold. Now you tell me how is that possible? Because before that, he looked like he was a guy who was over 35 years old. He still looked good, but he didn't look spectacular, but still good. But then as he got older, he got bigger, he got better, he got more powerful, and he got the knockout that he's been looking for. How did that happen? But then you got Tony Harrison, who can't even, get out the way of shots. You know what I'm saying? He can't even get his head off the line. Understand the ring was small, but he was just there like a sitting duck. Don't get me wrong. Tim Tszyu had, pretty good pressure. I would say it was superb pressure, but it wasn't hard to do that in a ring of that size with a guy like Harrison who just didn't seem to be able to just move around and execute his game plan. And Tony Harrison is truly a veteran. But I'm going to say this, right? We need to understand Tim Tszyu being able to take control of the fight the way he did so quickly. Look, I just don't think that's going to be the case getting in there with a guy like Jermell Charlo. Tony Harrison he didn't have to do some things. He did some things that to me just don't make sense. That's why I think we should also consider whether Tony Harrison took a dive. Right? So far we talked about PED versus clean, right? That's one thing that really crossed my mind while watching that fight. Is that Harrison was in there with a guy who could have been on PEDs. No proof of that at all. Maybe it's just he's a clean fighter, and he could have just fought another clean fighter that just was younger, and the young guy beat the old guy. But then again, we don't know, because when we look at it historically, there are some rare occasions where you have guys who are well beyond 35 who are doing spectacular things. And what that tells me is most guys shouldn't, especially when you look at it years and years ago. Most guys, by the time they get between that 30 to 35, they meet their expiration date, and that's just not what you see happening. Maybe it's genetics, athleticism, type of lifestyle they live. Maybe that is what helps them to extend their boxing career. But at the same time, I'm going to say, I'm not so sure about that. We talk about old and young, right? That's something that could have been the reason why Harrison lost too. But in taking a dive is something we really got to consider. You look at Tony Harrison, man. He was sitting there about to fight Fundora. So don't get me wrong. Fundora, in my opinion, probably would have beat Harrison. But it would have been, the circumstances would have been a little different. It would have had probably been a larger ring. Would have been able to box a bit more. But we'll never know. But he got an opportunity. You got to look what Tony Harrison was in his career. He probably was never, ever going to get a shot at Jermell Charlo again. He probably never, ever was going to make probably over $175,000. He ended up getting the call from Tim Tszú's team to fight. Now, I want to make sure I remind you all, Tony Harrison he was not the first choice. They went down the line, my understanding, of opponent A, B, C, D, and somehow they end up getting a hold of Harrison. And my question is this: why didn't opponents A, B, C, D, E, or however many they went through, why didn't they take the fight? You're telling me Tim Tszú couldn't have persuaded an opponent to fight him for a title elimination against Jermell Charlo? And I understand Tony Harrison and the position he holds and where he's ranked and everything in the sanctioning bodies, but what I'm saying is anyone who was going over there was probably going to make life-changing money. And you couldn't get anybody. Only person who wanted to take the fight was Harrison. And short notice and everything, I get it, but Harrison took it. Now, I'm going to tell you this. When I watched Harrison perform in that ring, especially when he was towards the end, when he was getting hit with hard shots, I made a video earlier today, and it got flagged by YouTube. I didn't get a strike on my channel, but it can only be viewed in certain parts of the world. I added video. I commented on the video, but YouTube flagged it. So I'm doing this video right here, but I'm not adding those clips because I don't have time to deal with YouTube and their rules. So I'm going to just do it the right way. But if you watch when he was getting the series of punches that put him in trouble and eventually resulted in the referee stopping the fight, Harrison never, ever made an attempt to clinch. He didn't even, in some instances, raise up his head. He kept his head down. There was one instance where he tried to get out the way of the shot. But for the most part, he was just standing there. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Tim Tszú wasn't throwing jab, right hand, hook, uppercut, nothing like that. He wasn't throwing combinations. He was just throwing the right hand. Right hand, right hand, right hand. And Tony Harrison was just sitting right there to be hit. Now you guys tell me, right? Because maybe I'm wrong. When have you seen a fighter with the talent of a Tony Harrison, right, get in the ring and just decide he is not going to throw his right hand at all? He just refuses to throw it. He's just going to try to win a fight with one hand. Now, intentionally, advertently handicapping himself. You got to help me make it make sense. So I tell you what I think it could be too. I have no proof of this. They were just having a conversation. I think Harrison realized, man, that them Tszú people were going to pay him money, and I think they had a conversation where it was like, hey, look, this is kind of what the situation is. You're on your way out. You ain't going to make this kind of money. This is what we're going to give you. But this is what we need you to do. And we need to make sure that Tim looks great going into the fight with Charlo. Now, again, I'm telling you, I don't know that. We're just having a conversation. I don't need anybody saying I'm reaching or nothing. No, I'm not reaching. I'm just having a conversation. That's why I said, made me think about if 32 is really about the shelf life, 30 to 32 is really about the shelf life in fighters. Maybe Harrison was just a clean fighter. And when you see some of these guys who are a clean fighter just getting overwhelmed, maybe these guys are on PEDs. But then again, it could just be old versus young. And even some of these guys who are 35, 40, maybe they're on PEDs. And that's why they're able to still look spectacular. And you look at Tony Harrison looking, less than stellar. It's because that's really how those guys who are looking spectacular beyond 35 years old is because they're on something. And then the other thing we're talking about now is just taking a dive. Look, this man was in Australia. He was very nonchalant. He was sitting there talking about he had on his, what they call Uggs or something, like house shoes. He got on his Detroit hat, a wife beater, sweatpants, out there on the beach, trying to hug Tim Tszyu. Didn't look like he was taking the fight serious at all. And that same nonchalant attitude is how he fought the fight. Offensively nonchalant. Defensively nonchalant. He got knocked out at the press conference. Very nonchalant. And it was almost like he just didn't care. And my thing is, how do you get a guy who says, this is my dream, right? Stars lined up for me to get my hands back on Jermell Charlo, because to me, he didn't beat me in that fight. I beat myself. So that belt is still mine. But instead of getting an opportunity to fight for the one belt, the WBC, I get to fight for all the belts. And he can't wait to get in there with Tim Tszyu. And then when he gets in there with Tim Tszyu, everything that we've seen him be able to do in fights. And I get it, he lost to, I think, J-Rock, he lost to Hurd, he lost to somebody else. But at the same time, he still had moments in those fights too. But everything that we've seen this guy do that has made him a big name in the sport, you just forget about it when you go to Australia to make $1.5 million. And now you're talking about retiring? Come on, man. There's no way in the world Harrison should have struggled with Tim Tszyu. And I understand the pace. Well, it was more pressure. It wasn't pace because Tim Tszyu wasn't really doing anything. He was just slowly taking his time. And Harrison just wasn't able to get out the way. It's like he would take a few steps and just stand there. I mean, just standing on the ropes. I'm telling you, it just doesn't make sense. And that's why we keep asking the question. And that during our conversation, man, how do aging fighters keep getting better? And Tony Harrison just got old overnight. You know what I'm saying? Again, is it you got guys who are on pads and then he's just a clean fighter and that's what happened? Is it just he was old and Kazuzu was a young fighter? Or did he take a dive? Like, to me, those are fair conversations to have. Even when you look at the footwork. Hey, from the early rounds, the footwork wasn't really there. Tszyu wasn't really throwing much. But what I thought was interesting is Harrison was just trying to score with his jab, and he was landing it at will. And most of the time, when he was landing, Tszyu wasn't coming back with anything. There was no response, but Tszyu was blocking a lot of those shots. It's like he knew what shots were going to be thrown to make sure that he was able to block them and come back with something. But I'm going to tell you something that I noticed in the fight. As Tszyu was pushing forward and he was stepping in with every jab that he took, right? Now, as a result, when it comes to Harrison, he wasn't trying to follow up to anything at all. But the other thing that really caught my attention is Harrison was the one who was leading, which was very unusual because that's not his style. So he was giving Costa Tszyu opportunities to counter. Even when you see the jab that Harrison was throwing out, he would let the jab just kind of languish out there. And Tszyu was countering with huge shots, man. I'm talking some big shots. But it wasn't making sense because that's not Tony Harrison. That is not his style. We know that Tszyu can be a patient puncher. We know Harrison is a very intelligent boxer who waits for the right opportunity to let his hands go. But in that fight, that wasn't the case. I mean, what we ended up seeing was Harrison being a bit impatient, plenty impatient, seeming to be panicking a little bit, and not being able to really use his lateral movement and do the things that he's normally able to do. And I understand the ring was small, but how the hell does Tim Tszyu just become like a damn full-on pressure counter puncher, boxer puncher? It just none of it makes sense. But at the end of the day, Tony Harrison just didn't do much, and the distance was being closed, and he wasn't able to escape, man. He wasn't able to pull the trigger, man. So it is what it is. But I really think if Tszyu would have been able to let his hands go, or he would have been forced to throw first, maybe Harrison would have had an opportunity. But when you look at it, that he wasn't even thinking like that, and that's his style. That's how you figure Tszyu's an aggressive fighter. Jermell Charlo's an aggressive fighter, who can be. And Tony Harrison had a great game plan against Jermell. And then you're going to come in with a guy like Tszyu, who's nowhere close to being as good a fighter as Jermell Charlo. And you're going to sit there, man, and just take it to the stupid in the ring. Tell you, it just doesn't make sense. So now everybody's saying Tim Tszyu solved the puzzle. He was able to get Harrison out of there before Charlo. Didn't take any damage. Charlo was still getting touched and clipped and buzzed by Harrison. So Tim Tszyu should go in and defeat Jermell Charlo. And I'm going to say, no, that's not the case. You can't look at the performance of Tim Tszyu against Harrison and say basically that Tim Tszyu would do the same thing to Jermell Charlo. First of all, Jermell Charlo is strong. He lets his hands go. He throws in combination. He's an intelligent fighter. I think the fight between Jermell and Tim Tszyu won't go past 4 rounds. I really don't think so. Because Harrison just had a tendency in that fight to stand straight up with his feet squared up, man. And that just made him vulnerable. He was off balance. I mean, stepping straight back into the ropes. I mean, not even out on an angle. I mean, none of the things that we know he can do as the master boxer, he just didn't show up this weekend. And, I truly believe that Harrison could have been paid to take a dive, but also he was out there, word on the street. He was out there pitching woo on the job, and could have been out there tasting that forbidden fruit and pulling a Deontay Wilder, and getting a little bit of that what out there on the Australian beaches, and that's something else that could have been an issue. You know what I'm saying? But right now we don't know. We're just having a conversation. At the end of the day, Tim Tszyu beat him, and that's just it. There's nothing else to really say. But I think it's fair for us to really take a look at this and continue to examine it, because I just don't understand how a 32-year-old fighter can look that old, especially when he hasn't been that active. He's been in the gym, he's been training, but it's not like he's been there's been so much wear and tear on him, and things have happened to where he can't let the right hand go. I've seen guys spar where they were afraid to let certain shots go because they're afraid of what's coming back at them. But I never seen somebody who just would go a whole fight trying to win with a super soft like touch jab, up jab. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just not gonna make it happen. It's just not gonna work out that way. So again, if the Pacquiaos can do it past 40, if the Pacquiaos can do it, the Wyman with Marcus can do it, the Hopkins, the Foremans, the Larry Holmes, you know, makes you wonder why Harrison wasn't able to do it. And when it comes to Tim, I don't think he's on PEDs. I just think he's a young fighter who he got lucky on that night. But I think we need to look at these other fighters who are 35 plus, and they may be some of our favorite fighters. But really try to understand how come Tony Harrison didn't have the stamina, didn't have the endurance, didn't have the power, didn't have the punch resistance. He didn't have any of the things that we see these much older fighters who possess and are able to do, things they're able to bring into the ring and through a 12-round fight. What is it that happened with Tony Harrison? What is it that he didn't have that those fighters have that precluded him from being successful in that fight? Now, I'm going to make sure I say it again. Tim Tszyu won. No argument there. I just think we need to pay attention. These guys here who are just getting stronger and faster as they get older. Let me tell you, that's not how it should work. I'll tell you that right now. There was a time where I used to run a mile and a half in like 7 minutes, 25 seconds. To some people, that's not fast. But for me, things started slowing down a bit, probably about 32, 33. And it would turn to like, the 8 minute and 15 seconds, 8 minute, 11 seconds, then up to like 10, 16. But what I'm getting at is as I got older and had to do these different fitness tests, and the mile and a half was one component of the fitness test, that I wasn't becoming a Bernard Hopkins. I wasn't becoming a Juan Manuel. I wasn't becoming a Pacquiao. I wasn't out here still running and doing all those things like I was used to do. I could get it done, but it wasn't the same. I think I wasn't quite a Tony Harrison, but if anything, I was probably more Harrison than Bernard Hopkins, than Pacquiao, than those guys who come back right now, the Terrence Crawfords and those guys. And I lived a clean lifestyle. But again, just can't make me understand and believe that as a guy gets older, he's going to get better. Maybe he gets more intelligence. Maybe he relies on his experience, and he uses that to win fights against a younger, stronger, faster, hungrier fighter. And he used that experience to defeat those guys like Mayweather did as his legs started to slow down a little bit. But when it comes to Tony Harrison, did he get old overnight? Or is it that he was just a clean fighter who maybe fought somebody on PEDs? Or was he an old fighter who fought a young guy? Or did he take a dive? I don't know. You tell me. But I'm going to tell you right now, these Rigondeaux, these Luis Ortiz, these other fighters who are close to 40, are still out here getting better, getting stronger. Y'all got to help me understand how that happens, because it's not normal. That being said, y'all keep cool. Hope you enjoyed this video. Shout out to the veterans. And as always, I'm in the breeze.